In this video, I'm going to talk about journal entries. And this is a continuation of my previous few videos where we talked about debits and credits and T accounts. Basically, I talked before about how when you record transactions in accounting, first you would record in the journal with a journal entry, and then you would record in the ledger. So you're copying whatever debits and credits you do in the journal over to the ledger. And copying is called posting. And I talked about how a debit is an entry on the left and a credit is an entry on the right. And that's just terminology in accounting. I would basically just ignore what you think of when you think of the words debits and credits, like your debit card versus your credit card. Just don't even think about that. Just know that in accounting, debits are on the left, credits are on the right. And I had said that we learn the ledger first because it's easier to learn debits and credits in the ledger because we're using something called the T account. And a T account is simply an informal ledger. So it's just easier because it's more visual. You can see the debit on the left, you can see the credit on the right, and it just makes it simple. And just to review, I put the rules again on the board. If it's an asset, a withdrawal, an expense, you would be adding to those accounts with debits, subtracting from them with credits. Everything else is the opposite. If it's liabilities, capital, or revenues, you add to those with a credit, subtract from those with a debit. So I already put that all on the board. I've already talked about that. I've already done some examples. And now we're going to backtrack a little bit and talk about the journal, where you would technically record first. So a journal is simply a chronological record of transactions. Chronological meaning they're in order by date. So basically what you're going to have in the journal are journal entries. Just entries in the journal. Very basic, very straightforward. And I'd already said in a previous video that this is in chronological order by date. So if you want to know what happened on a certain day, you would look in the journal. Whereas if you want to know what happened to a specific account, you would look in the ledger because a ledger is organized by account. Okay, but we have to backtrack and learn what a journal entry is. Now, something I don't think I mentioned before is we're learning journal entries and T accounts and how to record transactions. But when you record things in a software, like for example, if you're using QuickBooks, you're not really using debits and credits because the software is doing the debits and credits without you necessarily knowing what a debit or credit is. So when you write a check in a software, it's doing the debits and credits behind the scenes, and it may not say debits and credits. If you're recording a deposit in a software, you're recording debits and credits, but it might not visually say debit, it might not visually say credit, but it is recording debits and credits. So I just wanted to point that out. But moving on to the journal, I'm going to show you on the board what a journal might look like or what a journal entry might look like. But in the next video, I'm going to go through a full example where I go through some journal entries and T accounts. And I already have some videos related to this on my channel already. So you can look for those videos or you could just watch the next video in this series. But for this video, I just want to give you a general idea of what to expect. In the journal, you're going to have 4 different columns. You're going to have a column for the date, which I'm just going to go ahead and put today's date. It's September 5th. And if it's a new year, you would put a year in here as well. I'm just going to go ahead and put 2025, but you don't have to write 2025 beside every entry. And then it's going to have a column for the accounts and explanations. So the account is going to be the exact account name from the chart of accounts. So if you're debiting rent expense, you would write rent expense in here. You would not write paid rent expense. You would not write anything else but the name of the account. So let's say they're paying rent with cash. So you would be debiting rent expense. So that's going to go on the first line. And then you would put the amount in the debit column. So you've got a column for debit and a column for credit, and you would just put the number in the correct place. So you're always putting debits first. And that's just because accounting is very organized. So it's just easier visually if you're following basically the same processes for every entry, and it's nice and neat and organized, especially when you have a bunch of entries on one page. Okay, and then you would put your credits next. So if they're paying rent, we learned in the T accounts that that's a debit to rent expense, credit to cash. You're adding to rent expense with a debit, which is shown here, and you're subtracting from cash, which is an asset. You subtract from cash with credits. So we're debiting rent expense, crediting cash. So that's going to look like this. You're going to put cash in the account column, and then you're going to put the $1,000 over in the credit column. And notice that I put cash indented a little bit. That's just so visually it sets apart the debits versus the credits when you're looking at a bunch of words on a piece of paper. So credits are underneath the debit and indented a little bit. Now, in practice, in a software, it may not look like this exactly, but if you're learning from a book, if you're learning in an accounting class at a college, you may learn this way. Just keep in mind, we're learning this as if we're doing it by hand, but in practice, obviously, companies use software to save a lot of time. But before softwares were used, this is what was done. They would have literally a notebook, and there would just be a bunch of journal entries on a bunch of pages. So it had to be fairly organized. And then once you get the basic information of the journal entry, then you would probably also have some sort of explanation or description of what happened. So that would go on the next line. So I'm just going to put paid rent because we don't really have a lot of information about this. We don't know the check numbers, we don't know the vendor name or anything like that. But this would basically be like your description or memo line in a software. We're just putting some sort of explanation of what happened. So I'm going to put explanation would be underneath the debit and credit. And it is not part of the entry. It's not an account name. It's just extra information that's helpful to know what happened. In most textbooks, this is going to be shown in italics to set it apart a little bit visually, to know that it's not the debit, it's not the credit, it's just an explanation. But it's going to be pretty obvious what the explanation is. So in the next video, I'm going to go through some examples. So be sure to watch for that video. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and thank you for watching.